Hi, it's Andy and Alan here, Return to Healing on Sunday morning. And today, as Alan said, we're going to do drugs. We're going to talk about drug advertising, which, if you don't know, we're one of two countries in the world who are lucky enough to have the pharmaceutical companies educating everyone on television. And God knows, Alan, it's a gift, and we get to have see patients who have learned a great deal before coming to us from these very unbiased advertisements. It's interesting because we talk a lot about the
Wait, I didn't hear your sarcasm. Can you say that
no,
again?
I'm being serious now because God only knows. I've never heard of most of these drugs, but so I'm learning too. But two things. I mean, one is that we've spoken about how the drug companies have penetrated every tentacle of the medical system, from the American Diabetes Association to the American College of Psychiatry to the CDC, to every study ever done. And I think I told you I had a daughter of one of my patients who I explained about his 90-something-year-old father who was bleeding on a blood thinner. And I said, these blood thinners, all the studies were done by drug companies, and the actual benefit is negligible. And she said, well, my husband works for a drug company. Those are the best studies there are. And the drug companies are trying to educate people and find the truth. So there we go, Alan.
So that is true. I truly believe that the pharmaceutical reps, which I don't see anymore, I used to, but we are a pharma-free hospital and I am a pharma-free office, except for one thing I'll explain. Um, is I think they do believe what they're smoking or whatever you want to say with their drugs. It's, they've snowed them. These are not scientists that are marketing to you and coming to the office and, bringing people lunch. And we could talk about that and how it's evolved as well, because it's not just about the TV ads, it's about the total marketing that these folks do. But I think when you speak to a rep, I had one recently. I agreed to meet with someone who I literally know for like 40 years, has been calling on me from like five different companies. And I agreed to meet with them at the hospital because they have a new drug, which honestly I can't remember right now, but it's a new multi-drug treatment for H. pylori infections, which, has like five drugs in a packet. And their data shows like they're like 5%, better than what's out there for $2. And I started laughing because like she was selling it and she really believed it. Like she believed, like, she's a good person. She didn't read all the articles. She read the marketing materials that they were sold to tell us, to teach us what the frick to do. And it's just utterly absurd. And this is just another example of our effed up healthcare system, part of the medical industrial complex being big pharma and their lobbying groups, which is spending billions and billions of dollars between direct to physician marketing, direct to consumer marketing, TVs, magazines. It's all over the place. And like I laugh when a patient says, "Oh, I saw this commercial for blah 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 blah." And I was like, "Is that how you want me to practice my medicine?" And I just like,
Yeah, like somehow when we don't see the ads or we don't know about these drugs, it's some deficiency. It's interesting because the amount of money they are paying for TV to advertise drugs that most of us have never heard of, or that have a very small niche group that would be applicable. So news agencies especially, drug advertising is just behind food advertising. Now, when I say food, I don't mean eat well and healthy. I mean, McDonald's and Chick-fil-A and French fries. But, of course, we know that the food and the drugs go hand in hand, but they are both so drug advertising, we could talk about during COVID. I mean, there are studies that came out that said Pfizer spent far more advertising on TV than in research and development on any product it created, whether the vaccine or Paxlovid. And once you go on the news, so there are a couple reasons for this. Because most of us will look at these drugs for, let's say, ulcerative colitis or psoriasis, and we're not going to have a lot of patients who are going to use them. But doctors listen to this and say, "Oh, there's a new drug out." I know doctors who do that. They get their information from these sources. Number two, patients now go to their doctor and demand the drug without knowing anything about it and assuming it's good because everyone on TV looked pretty darn good, Alan. They were dancing and singing, there were flowers and everything. Th Three, they impact what the news says about medical stuff. That's the biggest thing. When you spend that much on, let's say, CNN, the people who are talking about medical issues on CNN are always going to be pro-drug. The doctors they bring on who are experts from all these places are pro-drug. By pro-drug, I mean they do work, they do research for the drug companies, or they give talks for the drug companies, which a lot of academics do. And the final one is just these companies want insurance to pay for the drugs. So for instance, you can't not see all these weight loss drugs on TV. And I just heard that the pressure has been put so hard on Medicare that as of 2026, they are going to start paying for these drugs, which they weren't because actually they're very inappropriate in the older population for many reasons. But now they're going to because of the pressure of these advertisements. So
Yeah.
these people aren't stupid when they advertise to this extent.
They're not stupid at all. They're great marketing people. And what's even sadder than the drug reps believing everything they say is the doctors believing it, because we know most physicians do not read the studies and do not analyze them. They're listening to what a drug rep says as real and fact, and this is it. Like, why would this person lie to me that they're trying to sell a drug? I was laughing the other day because you bring up Medicare now covering it. I don't know if you saw the president's press conference, but the CEO of one of these weight loss drugs actually passed out at the conference, and people were saying, "Oh, it was the stress of being with the president." And I said, "No, he was, looking at how many billions of dollars they were losing by this deal they made to cut the cost of the drug." I was like cracking up. I was like, "Yeah, he just lost like 12 trillion in his stock options that have going on." But the amount of money they're spending is just unbelievable. I actually tried to look before the meeting, or sometime during the week, thinking we may talk about this, of how much is actually spent, and it's really hard to get a good number. Like my closest estimate is about $50 billion a year, because you have to add in, direct marketing to the doctors, what they put on TV, what they put in magazines, and, what they put in these flyers they mail to people's homes, and the production of all this. You look at the commercials, and I laugh at most of them. The Jardiance one is my favorite. Jardiance is really swell. Jardiance is really swell. It's like freaking diabetes drug. It's really swell. It's
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, and they all have jingles. I remember my kids when we used to watch football way in the back in the past. Um, they had drug advertising like crazy. It was drugs and cars mostly, but they knew the jingles to the Viagra ad. They could repeat the whole Viagra ad. I was like, geez, this is. And look, we advertise drugs and alcohol, which I figured go go hand in hand. But yeah, I used to have some of these drug reps would come. Well, like you, I'm a drug-free practice. I started my practice 17 years ago, and we have never allowed anyone in the door to sell to us. But back in my previous practice, we did, and I wasn't in charge of that one. We tried to stop it actually, and the staff rebelled because they give free lunches and pens and pads and all this other stuff, and they're always so nice that they knew everything about everybody. But I remember, once a really pushy drug rep was pushing this product, and then the guy changed companies and worked for the competitor. And now he came in and pushed that product and said the original product he pushed for is a piece of junk. I said, God, you were really pretty emphatic about that first one. He said, "Well, I've learned, Dr. Lazarus, I have learned." He's learned because he has a new sheet of paper that now his talking points have changed, and that's how he's learned, and that's how doctors learn too, Alan, which is really sad.
and I also really can't figure out their rationale. you could almost see it with the weight loss drugs and the diabetes drugs. There's so many people on these things, and the patients hear them and they come into the office and they say something, and you know, usually if it's like, the Farxiga ad or the Jardiance ad, if I always want to say, oh, you think the Jardiance is, oh well, Farxiga might be a better drug. It's totally absurd, but like, what are they really trying to accomplish? And when it gets to the more exotic things, like they're advertising lung cancer
Right.
drugs on
Right.
TV, lung cancer drugs. Like, do you want your oncologist selecting a drug based on the TV ad or, what the real study shows? Like, are these people reading the studies or are they prescribing off of pharma ads?
Well, it is. I mean, and these guys know if you look at oncology, which is an interesting field, well, and my son's going into this field, but um, in fact, my friend and I, my friend who is your student, both said that oncology is the one discipline of internal medicine that we can't do on our own. We feel like we do everything else on our own.
No,
We don't need cardiologists, endocrinologists, nephrologists. We don't need them. We can do
no.
all that stuff, but oncology is a little more difficult. But I have a good friend who's a high up oncologist, and there's also a guy named Vinny Prasad who wrote a book. He's the biggest research oncologist in the country. Wrote a book called Malignant, which talks about how these drug companies impact oncologists to prescribe drugs, and these these drugs that are extremely niche drugs, right? We've seen for prostate cancer and lung cancer recently, a lot of these um, reimburse these doctors very highly. So doctors, oncologists can treat you many different ways. But there's some that are much more lucrative for them than others. And he told me part of the reason they throw these weird ads on TV is to give backing to these oncologists to use these drugs. So they're not only going to pay them more for a drug that does not work any better than the cheap drug, but also going to spread the airwaves with these advertisements. So people have heard of these drugs before and they seem legitimate. And that's part of is this creation of legitimacy. So yeah, there aren't a lot of people I'm treating with psoriasis, that it's that bad that we would ever use a biologic drug that can cause cancer and impact your immune system. It's just psoriasis. We could probably find other ways, but the few people who do use it are going to be reimbursed very highly. And everyone with psoriasis, even the most mild, is now going to say, "Well, why don't I take this drug?" And that's the whole point. They're trying to sell an idea, and it, like you say, it's a multi-pronged approach. You pay the oncologist or the dermatologist more money for using this drug. You put the airways through, you have some expert on the news talk about it. You send out flyers to people who you know have had a diagnosis of psoriasis on their chart at some point because they can find all that stuff out. And then it looks legitimate. Wow, I haven't just heard it on TV. I got this flyer and this guy from Harvard talked about it, and now my doctor's saying it's really good. And I know this friend Joe who took it, and yeah, this looks great. So it is this multi-pronged like this battle that and by the way, Alan, these companies spend it doesn't not just during COVID, they spend far more for marketing than anything else. This is what they do.
Exactly.
The product isn't important. It's the perception of the product that's important.
Absolutely. And for those on this, watching us who are fortunate enough not to have to deal with cancer treatment, what folks don't realize is that most oncologists have their own infusion centers in their offices, and they are buying the drugs and then getting reimbursed for it. And the more expensive the drug they give, the more they're going to get reimbursed because that's how Medicare pays for these things. So, they get it authorized and, drug X, which is, the old standard drug that they've been using for 50 years, they might make $200 on the treatment and drug Z, which is new and is $50,000 is something else. I just had one. My boss asked me to look up a drug for him because his relative in another country can't get one of these biologic agents for the treatment of neuroblastoma. And I looked it up, and the treatment is a weekly cycle times three, and each weekly cycle is $200,000. So, the treatment is $600,000, and it's indicated for metastatic neuroblastoma, which your prognosis based on that diagnosis is less than 6 months. So, we're going to give a drug that might make them live 3 extra days, or it might kill them right away. Either one. It's going to do one of those, but someone's going to make a lot of money out of it. And something is so wrong with that concept.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the advertising concept is to normalize these drugs. I mean, I just keep remembering, and you've probably seen them, Alan, all these prostate cancer drugs. These are drugs actually um, that are irradiated. They're radioactive. I know they said if you're pregnant, don't take this drug, and I'm thinking, what prostate cancer patient is pregnant? I said that seems a little odd to me, but I think it's because if anyone's in the room pregnant, they can actually get hit by
That's
this
true.
radiation. And I'm thinking, really, and I looked it up too. It was I think 60,000 a treatment. And you take it for long periods of time I'm listening to what they say, and they specifically never say you're going to live a day longer. They say you're going to live a day better. That's what they say, and I don't know what that means, but I can tell you these drugs don't extend life, and yet because they legitimate them, and the oncologists are going to get paid a lot to give them, and patients get some hope for a cancer that probably wasn't going to kill them anyway, but
Yeah.
um,
It's
that
again, we know that drugs are approved based on surrogate endpoints that often are meaningless, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or cancer or diabetes. Uh, and most of these drugs do nothing to improve or increase your longevity. It will do something that they put in the study to get it approved, and that's all they care about. And people don't understand this, and doctors don't even understand it because they are not really reading the literature that's coming out behind the release of a new drug. And we know all it takes is, one study to get a drug released, and most of them are flawed because they're all sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies again.
Yeah, we could ask what the solution is since we it's weird that New Zealand's the other country that allows drug advertising. New Zealand I wouldn't expect, but something must have happened there. There is the idea of free speech, that drug companies are allowed to do this, but we banned other ads, like you can't advertise firearms and smoking on TV. So I mean that Congress does have the ability to do this, but as you and I know, Alan, Congress is heavily subsidized by the same industry. And like I said, when the news media is too, you're not going to hear them pushing back against their second biggest advertisers. That you're never going to hear a story on the news on the news about this. And doctors don't do it too because frankly, doctors, this is their easy education. They get a lot from it. And I always I'm always curious how they design these ads because um, it is I like watching them. Um, and as a doctor, because the AMA is wrong about 90% of everything. And the AMA ruined our whole healthcare system as we discussed in our book, but they really want to get rid of drug advertising. And I wrote somewhere, I said and I do too. Don't get me wrong. I don't want them to advertise, but they'll find some other way if they don't. But I kind of invite patients I like when patients come in pushing an ad that they saw on TV because I'm ready. I literally, when I see an ad on TV, I read about the product. I learn about the product. So I'm ready. The AMA said they specifically said this. They said we want the ads to go away because doctors are unable to handle this deluge of patients asking for drugs, i.e., doctors are not capable of learning about the drug in an independent way and explaining to the patient why this drug might not be the right one. The AMA acknowledged that doctors don't read when they said that. And I don't care. As a doctor, I'm obviously not going to be swayed by these ads, but I'm going to be swayed to learn about the drug in the most objective way I can so I can push back. And I can tell you, Alan, when I do that, patients are appreciative. And they say, yeah, I figured that was something fishy. But when a doctor just says, yeah, it is a good drug, yeah, I'll send you, then it legitimates it. So it's really falls to us, primary care, because specialists are going to make money on a lot of these drugs. It falls to us to be the barrier between the drug companies and the patient.
Absolutely. And
We
that's
don't
another
want to
thing.
often.
You can't calculate the cost of what it is for doctors writing useless drugs or drugs that are have cheaper alternatives. All of this just adds into the total wasting money that we're spending in our, out of control healthcare system, all through to benefit the medical industrial complex, including the big pharma and the insurance companies. Like you see the insurance companies, we could talk about that too. It's open season for Medicare now, and every other ad on TV is now, for a managed Medicare plan, so you see the same thing.
And we could talk, I think maybe that's a good topic next week too, is talk about how the insurance companies profit from this. Because you would think the insurance companies would be invested in spending less money. You would think that they would want the cheapest drug. And by the way, in Europe, where where's national health care, they are invested in the cheapest drugs, which is why you see, I often say when a neurologist throws a drug at a patient, I say, they say, well, they say this is the best drug. I said, the only people who prescribe this drug are neurologists in the United States. There's actually no one else who uses this because, um, the bottom line is that most other countries have to cut costs. Why do our insurance companies thrive on spending more? And we could talk about that next time. It's an interesting conundrum. The
No,
person who talked about it the most was Elizabeth Rosenthal in her book American Sickness. I learned a lot from that. And another guy, Wendell Phillips, who was a guy who worked at one of these big insurance companies, I think Cigna, kind of spills it all also about how they do it. And we have both of them in our book. We talk about this really curious issue of how these insurance companies are looking to spend more money, which is bizarre. But yeah, that could be a great thing to talk about. But again, all this drug advertising, it is part of the grand plan of these companies to make it legitimate to everyone. So when they do spend this money, and the drug companies dole the money out to doctors who give the drugs, and dole it out to the media, and dole it out to Congress, and but also to the insurance companies, and we need to talk about why they are not being more responsible stewards of our healthcare dollars, and in fact, why they want us to spend more money and why it's good for them. And we can talk about that next time.
Well, we got to keep feeding the medical industrial complex. That's what's happening because we're just watching the costs go higher and higher and higher, and we're watching our life expectancy go lower, lower, lower. So,
Yeah, nobody opens their eyes to that, which is so bizarre. But okay, Alan. So that's what we'll talk about next time, if that works for you.
sounds good.
Okay, have a great day.
You too, Andy. Have a good week. Goodbye, everybody.